Major support for Carolina Business Review is provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. And Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
The gap between the haves and the have-nots is widening. And now the question of who's responsible for providing that community safety net is getting harder to answer. Welcome, and thank you for supporting the longest-running and the most widely watched source of Carolina business and public policy issues for over 25 years. I'm Maura Quinn, sitting in for Chris William. For decades, we've looked to traditional models to fund social services in our communities. But now, with needs rising, economic opportunity widening, and a lack of willingness from traditional sources to write checks and to do things the way we've always done it, communities are turning old models on their heads. Who's going to step in as government steps out? In just a moment, experts from both Carolinas turn their creativity loose on these critical issues facing communities in 2017.
Gratefully acknowledging support by Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina. Please visit us at southcarolinablues.com. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Barings, a leading global asset management firm dedicated to meeting the evolving investment and capital needs of its clients. Learn more at barings.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Kelly Callahan Cruz of United Way Association of South Carolina, Tom Keith from Sisters of Charity Foundation of South Carolina, Jeff Michael of the UNC Charlotte Urban Institute, and Kelly Brooks of Share Charlotte.
Hello and welcome to Carolina Business Review. So job numbers are up, the economy is roaring, and yet the economic divide is widening and there is more need for social services. How can that be? How can those facts really reconcile themselves? So, Tom, can I start with you?
Sure.
How can those facts reconcile themselves?
Well, it's a tough question, on face value. At face value, you see that many communities, particularly our urban areas, are thriving and succeeding, but that's not translating to every community. And we see particularly in South Carolina, a lot of our rural communities that have lost their economic engine, textile mills closing and other businesses closing, not yet able to reinvent themselves. And so what is lacking in many of those communities is that infrastructure to be able to provide a lot of those services that people need on an ongoing basis.
So, Jeff, can you give us some of the numbers around this?
Well, I'll try off the top of my head, but where it feels like a paradox is because, as you said, we're experiencing so much prosperity in the two Carolinas. So how can this be? And, I think your comment about how what we're looking at is in these traditional communities outside of our urban areas, they have not replaced the old jobs, manufacturing jobs, but that prosperity is really built on imported talent. So much of the talent that's filling the jobs is coming from outside of the state. And so we still haven't figured out how do we provide opportunities for individuals who were part of the old economy, who maybe don't have the skills to succeed in the current economy, the global economy we're currently experiencing.
So how is that impacting what you do in South Carolina?
It's huge. For us, we're the member association for all of the local United Ways in the state. And part of our mission is trying to connect those people to Health and Human Services. And we have seen a huge uptick in the calls to our 211s of just, where do I go to learn? Where do I go? I just lost my job. What do I do? How do I go get help and learn new trades? And it's hard to find it. And not all these rural areas, to what Tom said, even have a place for someone to retrain themselves. So it's tough.
So Kelly, how about you? You try to put together people who actually have money with people who don't have money. So you're maybe where some of those meet.
Yes, I think so. And I think the exciting part about all of this here in Charlotte is the work that the Opportunity Task Force has done over the last couple of years. And it's now helping us steer our attention towards how we're going to build that that upward mobility here in the community. And I hope that that then reaches out into some of the broader bands around Charlotte as well. But our work with the nonprofits are trying to help. How do we pull them together to help them be more effective, targeting those goals that the Opportunity Task Force gave the whole community?
Let's talk a little bit more about the rural-urban divide, because that does seem to be driving some of this. So the elections seem to bring some of that into sharp focus. So, Jeff, what do we do about this rural-urban divide? How can we attack that?
I think it begins with a shared understanding of the issues we're facing. Unfortunately, because of the economic challenges some of our more rural communities are facing, the frustration around that is manifesting itself in terms of the political response to that. And what that means is that we are going to the state houses, to the legislatures in Columbia and Raleigh, and we're acting like it's a zero-sum game, that there is nothing that we can work together on to lift all, the rising tide lift all boats. But in fact, we do have to begin to understand where the shared connections are, where the vision is. I wish I had some specific responses, some specific answers, but I do believe it begins with dialogue. And going back to the issue of so much of our prosperity is built on an imported talent, that means there are a lot of individuals in both Carolinas who don't understand the traditions of the state, the reasons why certain policies are in place the way they are, and they're bringing their own ideas about how policy ought to impact many of these social issues. And so again, dialogue is going to be an important part of that.
So are these shared goals the only way that we can get anything done?
Well, it's an important first step for sure. There's no magic bullet to make this work. I think that we have to. There's nothing that philanthropy in and of itself can do on its own to change. You've got to have government and business and philanthropy and the nonprofit sector working together. And there's so many cross-cutting issues. If you think about a rural community and you look at maybe transportation issues, and you look at access to health care, you look at the deplorable public school, public education issue, and dilapidated buildings. Many of these rural communities want to change. They want to get better. They just don't have the tools or the resources to get there.
It's complex. I mean, I was even, as you were naming off those different things, I was thinking, quality childcare. Exactly. If someone doesn't have a place to take their kids to go to work, they can't go to work. It's all of these things that are going to build that foundation to try and get some of these rural areas back to their energy again, if you will.
So isn't it going to be a little bit the larger communities, like the Charlottes and the Columbias of the world, thinking more broader outside of just the city and the urban areas? Are we not going to have to start widening that net and building that web out and sharing services and ideas and creating solutions together?
I think, and kind of what you were talking about the different communities and what's important to them. I think that's something that we hear a lot of. Why don't you just go in there and fix it? Well, there's a lot of community pride too, and maybe what you think is what needs to be fixed isn't what I think needs to be fixed. And I think that we have to look at these issues in this collective manner. And I heard, I don't know if you're familiar with Wes Moore, but he was just named the CEO of the Robin Hood Foundation, and he was interviewed and said, we have to become more data-driven and heart-led. And I think that's absolutely right. We need to go into those communities and see what is going on and see the data of what do you need, what's happening, and then go in and help.
And Kelly, to your point too about urban and rural communities working together, one of our real successes here in Charlotte has been the work of the Opportunity Task Force, and with the best of intentions, they've come out with a lot of great recommendations, but the catalyst for that work was the national study that came out of Harvard and Cal Berkeley that ranked Charlotte, the Charlotte region, as 50th out of the 50 major cities in America in terms of economic mobility. What we often forget, though, was that study looked at Charlotte as a commuting zone, not just Mecklenburg County, so that it included counties like Anson County and Gaston County. But our conversations, and it's not meant to be critical of that work, it's just to say we've started in a good place with that work within Mecklenburg County. Now let's take our learnings from that experience and expand it outward.
Sure.
So what work is being done to try to do that? Is there work now? And we know that there's the Leading Opportunity task force that's now the next step.
Right.
So there's work that's being done here. Is there work that's being done in South Carolina to address some of that?
I think so. There are certain task forces that have been created to sort of look into ways to create economic engines in our communities. And I think that's the key and I'll give you an example that one that you may not think about, but that occurred that has really spawned creativity and growth. And it's in Newberry, South Carolina, where if you drove down the street, they had storefronts closed up. A lot of businesses had closed, gone away, and they several years back renovated the Opera House. You know, an early 1900s building, and the community came behind it. There was millions of dollars put into it, and guess what? It became the economic engine, and 3 new restaurants opened. A hotel was built next door to the Newberry Opera House. Shops, boutiques were opened up as well. It's a small thing, but it shows you what one thing like that can do for a community to spawn other growth. So that's what we're looking for, I think, in other communities, to have that kind of catalyst.
So let's talk about the funding on this. So you were talking about this as an economic development piece. This is an economic development initiative. What are some of the other pieces that we can look at to fund some of these initiatives? So that one was that specifically economic development?
I would say, yeah, and it was mostly a private partnership with businesses and philanthropy individuals that wanted to see that come together. The arts wanted to see that happen. So yeah, I think we're going to have to develop not only a broad vision, but local visions. And many of these communities are going to need some help to do that effectively. You know, sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees because you're in the day-to-day. And I think that's where there's an opportunity for others to help communities really build and grow.
Yeah. And I think it's important to have what you're referring to, those community conversations, but across all sectors, like you said. You know, the mayor needs to be there, the deacons of the church need to be there, the teachers, the parents. I mean, everybody needs to be there to have that conversation about what's going to be helpful and good for their community, so they can all start going along the same arrows.
Right, and I think the philanthropic community we often look to for dollars, but in many ways they're leading on many of these issues in the form of convening conversations. Earlier this week I was part of a conversation that was looking at early childhood preparedness, workforce preparedness, and in particular looking at post-secondary education and what we might be able to do to prepare the workforce of the future. It's all interrelated. It's economic development, which is connected to education, which is connected to many of these social services we're providing. But it was the foundations, in that case the John M. Belk Educational Endowment, as well as the Goodnight Foundation out of Raleigh, who were statewide here in North Carolina, bringing the business community, the philanthropic community, and others to begin talking about that particular piece of the puzzle.
So multi-layered.
Multi-layered, absolutely. Government, nonprofit, and the business community.
So is there enough funding, multi-layered, across the states to bring this kind of prosperity around evenly to all the different areas that need this kind of help?
I think that's an excellent question.
That's an
Yeah,
interesting
there's
question.
$1 million question,
absolutely.
literally.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, we'd like to think yes, but again, it comes down to what we see all the time in our business, which is the capacity. I mean, it's great. I can give you $100,000 to help with your school readiness programs in a particular county, but if there's no one there to actually run it, if there's no one there to actually get it done, then it's a waste of money. You know, so there's a lot of conversations and capacity building, I think, need to be put in place.
Well, and to expand on that a little bit, I mean, with our work at Share Charlotte, we think that we have a real opportunity when we work with the whole landscape of the nonprofit sector here, that we can convene those conversations, because I think there's going to have to be some real candid conversation around with nonprofits in the same spaces, whether they're overlapping or not. They're still in the same space and they're still serving the people and families within that space. So to bring them together to really talk about what does, you know, the word collaboration is so cliche sometimes, but it really is that, and really seeing where those intersection points are, that we can maybe bring them together, because there are not enough resources for all of these individual nonprofits. There just isn't. And so we have to figure out ways in which we can maybe pull collaboratives together. So, and there's shared services models under certain under certain sectors or whatever. I'm just throwing stuff out there that we would love to start those conversations with some of our nonprofit partners, because that funding is so precious.
Well, I think it's also creative ways of communicating that with the government. I mean, we've talked about, with we have the 211 statewide system in South Carolina, and one of the things that we did was work with the state agencies of DHHS, which is Department of Health and Human Services, and Department of Social Services, and we're the call center for them. So the beneficiaries call in, we're their customer service line. And it was a neat way for the government to get the necessary services that they need for their beneficiaries, but knowing that the money that they're paying is going into a nonprofit, so any revenue that we earn goes right back into the local United Ways, or going right back into these services for folks. It's just a different way of using those state tax dollars, which has been pretty neat.
So this is state tax dollars. Is there any way to reach into and get the federal tax dollars as well, or have we all written off federal tax dollars?
Well,
I think there's a lot of ambiguity there, and I think
Right.
a lot of people are sort of sitting back and waiting to see what we have to work with coming out of Washington. But I think most people working in these fields believe we can't do it without the federal government as well. It's just a question of what that's going to look
policies.
like.
I mean, I think federally, when you think about the earned income tax credit, I mean, that's something that is very helpful for low-income families, low-income working families, to be able to get tax credits to help. And I know I had to use that too in my youth, and it helped me. So
Are you seeing some of the federal tax dollars begin to dry up in some of the work that you do?
Yeah, I would say that if that happens and we see federal support coming into South Carolina, I think that's sort of icing on the cake. With
I was just going to say that.
Yeah, with a grant or a program, we're grateful if that happens, but we can't count on that. So we have to work beyond that and to go in and try to find other funders, partners, private and public, in order to create change in our communities. And you made a good point, Kelly. I think that oftentimes it can be people going into work in rural communities can be prescriptive. They can say, well, we know or think this is what's best for you. You should be doing this. When the folks on the ground are like, well, that may be what you think is best, but we really need something else. So we really have to engage those people in the neighborhoods and those stakeholders in those communities to get their voice heard, so any changes that occur are things that they buy into.
And we're seeing a lot of ambiguity around healthcare. We're not sure what's going to happen with healthcare. Is that impacting the work that you do as well?
People are scared. People don't know what's going to happen, and so we get a lot of, well, what should I do? Should I even try and sign up? And it's like, yes, you need to have insurance. I mean, that kind of thing, or trying to help them, connect them to free medical care, free medical clinics. It's all of that, but people are nervous. Yeah, understandably.
Jeff?
Well, I'm not as familiar with the healthcare field in terms of policy and how this is playing out there, but I will say we talk about the economic divide and what's happening in rural communities, but what we also see is that the largest employers now, oftentimes in some of these rural communities, small towns, are the hospitals, are the medical facilities. So, healthcare has even taken on an economic development element in this discussion. Absolutely. It's important to these communities who have lost their mills or lost their other major employers.
That's true.
So is there an effort, or is there an opportunity for awareness, maybe marketing, that might help in any of these situations? Do any of you work on marketing initiatives that might help?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah? So talk about that.
Well, specifically, we were talking about it earlier. In talking about 211, I mean, we've had this service since 2006. It's been a long time. And for a long time, it's been, that 211 is what those people call if they need help with rent assistance or something, But it isn't. And we are changing our marketing. It's 211 is for everyone, because, I mean, with the whole opioid issue that's going on, we have people from all walks of life calling 211 saying, what do I do? I think my son is on drugs. Where do I go? What do I do? Nobody knows how to navigate that. I wouldn't know how to navigate it. So it is truly for everyone to try and get connected with some of this help. So, but that's important.
And a lot of what you do, Kelly, is really marketing based.
It is. It's about telling a story to the people that live in a community. And I think I think marketing has taken kind of a back seat to the actual issue, which is not great, because you can have an issue, but if you're not telling anybody about it and you're not telling them the issues and the solutions, then how can we solve it together as a community? So we try to take all those big issues that are going on in the community and try to break them off into bite-sized pieces for people to understand. Because if you're thinking about being a community member or investing in your community or any type of philanthropy, it's very subjective. It's very personal to you and what your circumstances are. So if we can meet people where they are in their story, then I think we'll ultimately be successul.
I mean, you have to. When you think about if someone is looking at their Facebook page, they're seeing those snippets for our, as we were talking about earlier too, that the global philanthropy, and gosh, somebody needs clean water in Africa. It's right there. Yeah, they do. But there's also people that need clean water in Flint. I mean, so. And so I know that sounds kind of trite, but you do. You have to market this to try and get the attention. It is.
Right. And Tom, what's the biggest challenge in the not-for-profit world now?
Well, one comment on the health care. I
Sure.
think since the Affordable Care Act and Medicaid expansion, which some states took and some states didn't, it has really complicated things for a lot of people. But if you look at our states, North and South Carolina, and think about challenges that people have that are living in poverty, it's not one issue. I mean, financial is certainly a factor, but it's affecting the elderly, it's affecting young people, it's in rural, it's in urban. And what's really becoming a hub for many of these communities is the churches. The religious base in these communities are really the central point of activity, of collaboration, connection. So churches in South Carolina in particular are being asked to do things on the social service side more than ever before, running after school programs, running food pantries, tutoring programs, transportation programs to get elderly people to medical appointments. So there's a lot of that going on.
We're seeing it here in Charlotte too.
Yeah, we are. Yeah.
Does any and all of this create more of a strain on the relationships that you all have with your corporate partners, because there's more grab, more people wanting these precious corporate dollars?
Well, sure, but I think it's that whole relationship. I mean, for example, there's plenty of corporations out there too. So where one might be focusing on one issue that's more important to one of your colleagues, there's going to be another one that could help you on another issue that could be important to you. And I think it's getting out there, it's building those relationships, not staying in your silo.
There's a self-interest involved as well, just in terms of the workforce. Saw something recently that was looking at, by the year 2024, I think here in North Carolina there was going to be the need for 550,000 new jobs, or there would be 550,000 new jobs. But in terms of population projections, something like 80,000 fewer people who are working age that would be there to fill that job. If you add to that issues of readiness, skills, the crisis becomes even greater. And again, it's all related to affordable housing, transportation, healthcare. How can we expect people to go back and get training if they don't have childcare? And so all of these issues are related.
Right.
So we only have a couple of minutes left, and I want to ask each of you to tell me maybe one sentence what you are optimistic about in this arena, because I know you are optimistic about a couple of things. Tom, can I start with you?
I'm optimistic that there is more hopefulness that I have seen over the past few years than before. At times I've often felt like it was pessimistic, but I think there is more optimism, there's more energy around making things better in our communities. So I'm hopeful there.
Good. Kelly, what are you optimistic about?
I'm optimistic about the fact that I think our community especially, and I hope others, we're finally at the point where it's time to let creativity and innovation take over. It's time for those elements to infiltrate our community and to help solve these problems. It cannot be same old, same old.
Okay. And
I'm really hopeful because of the young people that are coming up. I mean, I have a 14-year-old son, and his friends, they're always looking for something that they can do to help. Who can we help? Let's have this book bag drive or something. They are constantly trying to help, and I love that. It makes me excited. Yeah, it's neat.
The young people, optimistic about them. Jeff?
I think beginning where we started, or answering that question from where we started, the paradox of economic prosperity in the Carolinas, and yet we're facing these challenges. Fortunately, we're living in a place where that prosperity gives us resources, not only financial resources, but also intellectual talent to tackle these issues. And I'd much rather be there than to be in a community where there's economic stagnation trying to deal with these same issues.
You're absolutely right. Thank you all so very much for coming and tackling this issue and giving us such great innovation and really thoughtful answers. We appreciate that. If you have thoughts that you want to share, you can come to our website, carolinabusinessreview.org. You can also tweet some thoughts at Carolina Policy, and we welcome your ideas. Thank you again for joining us. Have a great week.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, Barings, Grant Thornton, Novant Health, Sunoco, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, and by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.